When you send money overseas and see SWIFT code on the form, what do you think actually happens to your cash? Most people imagine dollars flying through the internet from one bank to another like a digital suitcase. But the truth is much stranger and much, much bigger. The system that makes that transfer possible is a 1970s Belgian messaging network that doesn't move a single dollar. It's not one. It just sends formatted text messages between banks. Yet those messages now sit behind an estimated $5 trillion a day in global transfers, plus trillions more in domestic wires. So how did a simple messaging service become the quiet giant that moves the global economy? Let's rewind. Before this thing existed, cross-border payments were basically done over something called a Telex machine. Banks would type out free-form messages, clerks would manually read them and then rewrite them. As you can imagine, there was no guarantee that the instructions were consistent, standardized, or even spelled correctly. It was slow, chaotic, and ripe for errors. In the late 1960s and early 70s, big international banks started to freak out. What if one private American bank's proprietary system became the global standard? That single firm could essentially control the plumbing of world finance. That was a terrifying thought for everyone else. So, in 1973, 239 banks from 15 different countries met in Belgium. They formed a cooperative, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, or as we know it, SWIFT. Their goal wasn't to move money, it was simply to agree on a common language and build a private telecom network so their computers could talk to each other about payments, securities, and trades. SWIFT went live with its messaging services in 1977, replacing the old Telex system for its member banks. It rapidly became the trusted backbone for cross-border payment instructions. Through the early 1980s, membership just exploded. By the end of that decade, SWIFT had over 2,800 institutions connected and was handling nearly 300 million messages a year. This is the quiet tipping point of the 80s and 90s that nobody talks about. While everyone else was watching cable TV and listening to their Walkmans, banks were switching from manual Telex to automated SWIFT messages. This was a revolution. It turned cross-border payments into something computers could handle at an industrial scale. By the mid-1990s, SWIFT had evolved way beyond just basic payment instructions. In 1990, it launched an FX trade confirmation service called Accord. This service automated the confirmation of foreign exchange deals between banks and then generated the follow-up payment messages automatically. At the same time, SWIFT was moving into securities and money markets. So the same network that told a bank how to send cash could also confirm stock trades and settle financial positions. That's how it grew from some telecom thing in Belgium into a core piece of the global financial nervous system. Let's fast forward to today to see the sheer scale of this thing. As of 2015, SWIFT connected more than 11,000 financial institutions in over 200 countries and territories. About half of all high-value cross-border payments worldwide were using the SWIFT network. In 2022, SWIFT member institutions were sending about 44 to 45 million messages per day. Then in 2023, its own annual review reported a staggering 11.95 billion messages for the year. That's an average of 47.6 million messages every single day, covering payments, securities, treasury, and trade. So what are those messages actually worth in dollar terms? SWIFT itself is very careful about this. Remember, it doesn't settle funds, it just carries the instructions. But regulators and industry documents give us a sense of the scale. A U.S. Treasury-linked report noted that SWIFT messages direct the transfer of nearly $5 trillion worldwide each day. And more recent industry sources still use that same figure. Around $5 trillion per day is the ballpark value of funds moved based on SWIFT traffic. That doesn't mean SWIFT holds the money. This means the instructions for who owes what to whom, in which currency, and at which bank are riding on those messages at that incredible scale. Here's the key piece of the puzzle. SWIFT is only the message side. It's the actual movement of money, the settlement, happens on completely different systems. In the United States, for US dollars, the two main settlement rails are Fedwire funds, run by the Federal Reserve, and CHIPS, the clearinghouse interbank payment system, which is a private system owned by big banks. Fedwire is what's known as a real-time gross settlement service. Each transfer is settled individually, in central bank money, and it's final and irrevocable. As of 2024, Fedwire processed an average of about 836,000 transactions per day. The average daily value? Around $4.5 trillion. That's right, $4.5 trillion every single day. CHIPS works differently. It's the largest private sector US dollar clearing system used mostly for high-value, time-critical payments. As of late 2024, it was settling around 500,000 payments per day, with a total daily value of about $1.8 trillion. Instead of settling every payment one by one in real time, CHIPS uses a clever system called multilateral netting and a patented liquidity-saving algorithm. Participants fund the system with a relatively small amount of money, and CHIPS matches and nets out all the obligations. This is pure financial engineering from the 80s and 2000s, using math and software to turn a small amount of funding into trillions of dollars of daily settlement. In fact, just $1 of funding in the CHIPS system can support about $29 of settled payments. So if you zoom out, you can see the whole architecture. SWIFT messages are the global language that tells banks what to do. Then, systems like Fedwire, CHIPS, and other large-value payment systems around the world actually move the balances. A typical cross-border dollar payment might start as a SWIFT message containing all the details: sender, receiver, currency, and any intermediary banks. Once the banks agree on the instructions from that message, the actual settlement often happens over Fedwire or CHIPS in the US or in other similar high-value systems abroad. The messaging and the money are separate, but they are tightly coupled. The numbers here just dwarf almost everything in new fintech. Industry reports note that stablecoins, the flashy crypto payment tools you hear about, facilitate only about $20 to $30 billion of real on-chain payments per day. That's less than 1% of the global daily money transfer volume. Compare that, tens of billions a day on the shiny new rails versus multiple trillions per day on the SWIFT-linked systems that were architected back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The old pipes are still doing almost all of the heavy lifting. Over time, these systems have continued to evolve. Fedwire and CHIPS have been modernizing in parallel. The Federal Reserve, for example, has migrated Fedwire to a new messaging standard to carry richer, more structured data. This makes it easier to detect sanctions and money laundering risks in those trillions of daily flows. Together, Fedwire and CHIPS handle about 96% of all large-value domestic and international US dollar payments. There's one more fascinating twist to this story. SWIFT has become so central to the global economy that access to it is now a geopolitical weapon. Industry experts and policy discussions highlight that disconnecting a country's banks from SWIFT, the way some Russian banks were after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, is considered one of the most severe financial sanctions available. If your banks can't send or receive SWIFT messages, they can't easily move money through the mainstream global system. The network that started as a neutral telecom cooperative in the 70s is now a powerful lever in international politics. So let's put it all together. It starts in 1973 with 239 banks creating SWIFT in Belgium. Through the 70s and 80s, the network goes live and expands to thousands of institutions. By the 90s, it's adding new services, and banks are automating their entire back-office workflows around these messages. And from the 2000s to today, SWIFT has grown to over 11,000 institutions, sending tens of millions of messages a day that coordinate the flow of roughly $5 trillion. Meanwhile, the actual settlement is handled by giants like Fedwire and CHIPS, which themselves move another $4.5 trillion and $1.8 trillion, respectively, every single day. So the next time you see SWIFT code on a form or a banking app, remember what's really happening. You're not just typing some random letters. You're replugging into a 1970s Belgian messaging cope that quietly coordinates something like $5 trillion a day in global value. And the real money moves on separate, high-value rails that themselves push trillions between banks every business day. The most shocking part is just how invisible all of this is. There's no flashy app, no crypto branding, no slick user interface. It's just message formats, bank identifiers, and payment systems that were mostly designed decades ago. And yet they still move far more money than almost every future of finance technology you see in the headlines today. It's the hidden machinery that keeps our world running. Thanks for watching. If you found this look behind the curtain of global finance interesting, Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more videos like this one. See you next time.